The Princess of the Chalet School, Chapter 19, Consternation. The rising bell had gone, and Bianca, drowsing comfortably among the sheets, was rather surprised that nobody made any effort to get her out of bed. As a rule, it was only the exertions of Elisaveta and Joey that got her down to Frühstück in time, but today there was only silence from behind the curtains, which hid the other beds from view. The window was wide open, she knew, for her own curtains were drifting lazily backwards and forwards in the breeze. Finally she roused herself sufficiently to call, "Joey, what's the hour?" There was no answer. "Horrid things," she thought. "They've got up and gone out early without waking me. Now I shall be late, and Mamie will be cross. Oh dear." As there seemed nothing else to do, she rolled out of bed, snatched up her towels, and made for the bathroom. It was so late that she only had what Joey called a cat's lick and a promise, and then she fled back to the bedroom and hurried through her dressing. With all her haste, she wasn't nearly ready when the warning bell went, and even when she was dressed, she had to turn all the bed-clothing out, carry them, and hang them over the balcony rail to air. She grabbed them up, pushed the curtains aside, and then nearly dropped them. Joey's bed was just as she had got out of it. Well, words failed Bianca. She scrambled through the window, hung up the burden anyhow, and made a dash for Joe's bed. The final bell sounded, and she did so, but Bianca was a guide, and she couldn't leave the bed like that. Joe would get into a most fearful row if it were found. She stripped that bed at express speed and hauled the curtains back, and then she got her second bad shock. Elisaveta's bed was in the same condition. Well, there was nothing for it but to strip it too. Bianca did so, and then went down to Spisal nearly 10 minutes late. As she came in, Miss Bethany turned round. "Bianca, you are very late," she said severely. "And where are the other two?" It was beyond Bianca. She stared dumbly at her head mistress. "Did you not hear my question?" demanded Miss Bethany, with excusable annoyance. "I want to know why you three are all late for Frühstück, and where the other two are." Bianca found her voice. "I do not know, madame," she said faintly. "I thought they would be here." "You thought they would be here? Do you mean that you have not seen them this morning?" "No, madame." "Then where are they?" "I do not know, madame." Miss Bethany turned from Bianca to the rest. "Have any of you seen either of them?" Nobody had. Neither could anyone suggest where they could be. Bianca was sent to her seat, and the school was told to go on with its meal, while Miss Bethany returned to hers. "Coo," murmured Margia to her next-door neighbor. "Frida, I wouldn't be those two for anything. Where do you suppose they are?" Frida had no idea on the subject, and the conversation languished. As Grizel said afterwards, how could anyone talk with Madame looking like a thunderstorm and an earthquake rolled into one? When grace had been said, Miss Bethany called the prefects to her study and told them to find other people to make their beds for them and to go and look for the missing pair until the bell rang for prayers, or until they were found. Then she went to the blue dormitory to see if she could find any clue to their absence there. She found Bianca making her own bed at the same express speed at which she had stripped. The curtains were thrown back in accordance with the rules, and the bedding of the two was all aired on the balcony. With a sudden remembrance of the Italian child's lateness, the head turned to her. "Were those beds stripped when you got up, or did you do them?" she inquired. Bianca stopped with her plume in her arms and shuffled uneasily from one foot to the other. She wasn't very sure what to say. She had no desire to get them into any further trouble, and she couldn't tell a lie about it. So she said nothing, brought wrath on her own devoted head. I am waiting for an answer, Bianca, the head said in such icy tones that the child gave it up. No, madame, they weren't, she said unwillingly. Then who did it, you? Yes, madame. Is that why you were late? No, not exactly, Bianca stammered. How do you mean? Were you late to start with? Yes. I see. And I suppose you thought that as you were late, a few minutes more wouldn't make much difference. Bianca's head went down, and her cheeks burned. She wondered if the head was going to punish her very severely. It was mistaken kindness, Bianca, said Miss Bethany gravely. You should not have done it. I will excuse your lateness this once, but you must be on time for the future. Then she left the room, and Bianca, having finished her own work, set to work and made Elisaveta's bed. She turned to Joey's quarters next, and had got the under blanket and sheet nearly tucked in, and was bringing the pillows, when she gave a little exclamation and dropped them. On one she had seen the note which Joey had left when she had gone off on her mad adventure. With hands trembling and with eagerness, Bianca unpinned it, and then tore down the stairs of the study, nearly knocking over Frida as she went. Miss Bethany was there, talking to Miss Maynard, and when she burst in without knocking, the head looked up, annoyed. Really, Bianca, she began. Then she stopped as she saw the little note the girl held out, with its direction, Madge, written by Joey's unmistakable scrawl. It was pinned to the pillow, panted Bianca, who was breathless with haste. I did not see it when I stripped the bed. The head took it and tore it open. The two people in the study watched her face anxiously as she read it, and saw it change to a whiteness which made Miss Maynard step forward hastily and put an arm around her. Go and fetch some water, Bianca, she said sharply. Don't speak to anyone on the way. Bianca vanished, looking thoroughly startled, and the mistress bent over her chief. Don't try to talk yet, she said. Wait a minute. But Miss Bethany put her gently on one side and got to her feet. She swayed a little, but she pulled herself together and gave Miss Maynard the note. Read it, will you? She said. I don't think I've taken it in quite. Miss Maynard read the note rapidly. It was brief and to the point. Dear Madge, Elisaveta is in danger from Prince Cosimo, so the man who was sent here has taken her into hiding. I don't think he really was sent, as his friend talked Russian and said we were brats and the other things. I promise you to keep an eye on her, so I've gone after them. Don't worry, and tell Jem if he wants to follow us. I've left the trefoil over here and there. I've got some chalk in my pocket, and I'll draw it. Also, I've got my scout knife, and all the money E and I have. Don't worry. And write or wire to Belsornia. The name of the friend is Carlo Belsorni. Love, Joey. Of all the mad things to do, exclaimed Miss Maynard, when she had got through it, and then she turned to the head. My dear, don't look like that. Joey's got her head screwed on right, and she hasn't been a guide for nothing. Let me ring up Dr. Jem and send off that wire at once. Yes, at once, said Miss Bethany. In the meantime, get the school together. It's nearly time for prayers, isn't it? And take prayers, and tell them that Elisaveta has gone to see some friends and taken Joe with her. Whatever happens, you must have as little talk as possible. Miss Maynard agreed with her. She went out, sent Marie off to the post with a telegram to Signor Calmori, the secretary of the Crown Prince, and rang up Dr. Jim, who promised to come down at once. And then she rang the prayer bell and took prayers. After they were over, she made the announcement and sent the girls in to their exams, with Miss Wilson and Miss Carthew in charge. Miss Durant was with the babies, and when she got back to the study, she found Mademoiselle with the head. Bianca had been put on her honor not to mention anything until she was given leave. Mademoiselle was standing in front of the window, wringing her hands. Never, never will I understand the girls of today, she was crying. When I was a child, I should never have dreamt of going off like that. I should have told my elders, knowing that they would know if it were right for me to do so. Miss Bethany raised her head with a faint smile. I'm afraid it's partly my own fault, Elise. It is quite true. I told Joey to look after Elisaveta. I never thought of her doing it to these lengths. But that's largely what has sent her, I feel sure. In any case, we cannot do anything more till Dr. Jim comes. Then I will set off at once to find the children, and I will never rest till I do. After all, it may be all right, put in Miss Maynard. We've only what Joey imagined she heard this Carlo Belcerni say to go upon. And Joe's knowledge of Russian is not very full as yet. Madge shook her head. I don't know anything about Carlo Belcerni, but I do know that I have spoken to Signor Tarnicki, and I didn't like him. What are the girls to know? Asked Mademoiselle. Nothing as yet. If it's all right, we should only be doing the very thing to bring Cosimo on their track, and if it isn't, then I know that Belsornia won't want a fuss made to draw attention to it. I must wait until I hear from them. How the morning passed after that, not one of the three could say. Dr. Jim appeared in about an hour's time, and he agreed that nothing could be done until word came from Belsornia. He sent Miss Maynard along to the Spizits end of the lake to see if there were any trefoils drawn there, and went himself up the valley to see what he could find. The mistress returned first to report a complete failure, but he came back saying that the symbol had been drawn on the fence between the valleys, and also on the farther side of the little footbridge which led over the dry bed of the river. They are going over the Tiern Pass, then, said Madge. Well, we at least know that much. At 2 o'clock, an answer arrived from Belsornia. It came in an aeroplane, and in the shape of Captain Trevelyan, one of the Crown Prince's equerries. He had flown from Belsornia on the receipt of Miss Maynard's very guarded telegram, made a landing at Iben, a little way down the mountain, and come on to Brassau as fast as his legs would carry him. He reached the chalet when the girls were busy with afternoon exams, and asked to be taken to Miss Bethany at once. She came to meet him, her face as white as a sheet. I'm sorry to have to tell you, madame, he said, that Carlo Bersani is one of the aliases of Prince Cosimo. I'm afraid he has kidnapped the princess. Madge stood in perfect silence. Dr. Jim put his arm round her to steady her, for she was swaying as she stood. The captain looked surprised at the head's emotions. Miss Bethany's little sister has gone with them, said Dr. Jim. She said that she would follow them and leave signs wherever she could to help us track the party. The captain's face relaxed. I'm sorry, madame, he said. I will go at once, if you will tell me the sign. I'm coming with you, said Madge, speaking in a toneless voice. I will go and get ready. She left the room, and the doctor turned to the other men, an eager question on his lips. If Cosimo finds out what Joey is doing, will he hurt her? Captain Trevelyan was silent for a moment, and then he spoke. If Cosimo is in a good mood, he may do no more than take her prisoner, he said. If not, then God pity them both, replied the captain gravely. Cosimo has a warped brain. I do not know what he will do and what he is capable of. There was a stillness in the room. Then the doctor spoke again. Miss Bethany must not know that yet, he said. I agree, replied the other men. God send we reach them in time. And it was with these few sentences ringing in his head that Jim Russell set off with his future wife and captain to find the two children. Chapter 20. Joey on the Trail. When Jo Bettany set off with her mad chase, she had a very definite plan in her mind. If possible, she meant to keep Cosimo and Tarniki from knowing where she was. So long as they kept to the mountain region, that was all right. The dew would help her to track them, and even when it dried, she expected to be able to follow them. She had always been good at tracking, and had learned to be very observant. It was just as she dropped onto the grass below her balcony that she had an idea which made all the difference to the adventure. She would take Rufus. As Miss Maynard had said, she had her head screwed on right anyway, and she argued that his noise would be of great assistance, supposing she were stumped. Besides that, Rufus would be a valuable bodyguard if the men tried to hurt either Elisaveta or herself. She went round to the shed where he spent the nights, and let him out, first clutching him round the neck and whispering that he must be very quiet. Rufus always understood what his little mistress required of him. So he walked demurely out of the shelter and made no effort to express his delight except by low whines. Joey slipped her handkerchief through his collar, and the pair set off. Naturally, what she should have done was to rouse her sister and let her arrange for the following Elisaveta. But the sensible course never appealed to the younger Miss Bethany. Also, she was not sure how much Madge was supposed to know. Tarniki had been most impressive on the need for secrecy, and if it were all right, then it would never do for 2 or 3 people to know of the plan. Joey's idea was to follow the fugitives till she knew where they were, and to find out if these 2 men had any right to carry off the princess. If they had, well and good. She would come home at once. If not, then she would bring Elisaveta with her. Jo had rather vague ideas as to the responsibility of her sister in the matter, and she was resolved to save her any trouble that was possible. The course the 3 had taken was easily seen, for the heavy dew showed their tracks quite plainly. They had gone straight across the field, through the back gate, and on to the head of the valley. That meant that they were going over the Tern Pass, and Joey guessed that they would be obliged to travel fairly slowly once they reached the foot of the Turnjock, for the path was rough, and Elisaveta was no climber. She herself was a good mountaineer for her age. She had climbed the Turnjock by herself as far as the narrow ledge, where accidents sometimes occurred, and she had been right to the summit with Herr Minch, Frida's father. She had no fear, therefore, of not being able to catch them up, so long as they did not turn off to the main road and use a car. The dawn was filling the sky with rosy clouds by the time she reached the foot of the great Turnjock, which hung frowningly over the green valley. She had stopped once to get a drink of milk and a roll beyond the Lauterbach, the tiny hamlet near the head of the valley. She had also bought 2 more rolls and 2 blauberine torts, for she guessed it might be difficult to get anything later on in the day. More she did not dare do, for it would cause talk, and besides, she had no means of knowing how far her money had to go. From there to the opening of the pass was a matter of 5 kilometers, and by that time she had got to the rocky path, which is the beginning of it. Joey felt somewhat tired. A little mountain stream fell over a miniature waterfall into a tiny pool. a little way away from the side of the road. Jo made for it, laying down on her face to drink thirstily. Rufus followed her example, and presently the two rose and went on, feeling much better. "Thank goodness," said Joey to the dog. "We weren't likely to suffer from thirst. There are streams everywhere round here." They marched at the slow mountaineer's pace, which Herr Mensch had taught her, which she knew she could keep up for some time longer. They had gone a very little way along the pass when they got to the first clue as to the track. Hanging from a little point of rock and blowing idly about in the breeze was a square of white material. Joey raced up to it eagerly and snatched it from its perch. She recognized it at once for one of the handkerchiefs Elizaveta had taken with her. "Sensible kid," said Jo approvingly. "Now I know for certain that they've gone this way." She tucked the handkerchief into her pocket and went on light-heartedly. She was now in a region which she did not know of. The rocks overhung the path, a thing for which she was thankful. It was long past noonday, and the sun was hot. Joey argued that the two men would not dare to hurry the princess too much. Cosimo would not want to have her ill on his hands. By this time Joey had firmly made up her mind that it was Cosimo who had taken the princess, and she was not strong. It was obvious, therefore, that they would rest. The only thing was that they would not dare to rest long on the pass, which was a highway into Germany. So she must carry on for as long as she could. It was nearly 3 o'clock by the sun when she finally sat down to eat her rolls. She ate her food slowly, then lay down at length for a few minutes and fell asleep. She slept for an hour. Then she awoke, feeling very stiff and full of horror at the time she must have lost. She got to her feet and stumbled on. Luckily they came to another mountain stream before very long, and Joey knelt down to bathe her face and hands roughly in the water. She felt better after that, and a long drink, and just as she rose to her feet, she came on another clue. There was a little bush of wild barberry on the other side of the stream, and tied to one of its branches was Elizaveta's hair ribbon. Joey tore off her shoes and stockings and waded through the clear water. When she had reached the bush, she found that the ribbon had been tied so as to bend some of the smaller twigs together and point up the mountain, the guide's sign for a road to be followed. How thankful she had felt that she had given up a whole Saturday afternoon once to teach the woodcraft signs to Elizaveta. If it had not been for that, she might have lost the trail. Rufus was sniffing at the ribbon. Joey held it out to him. "Follow," she said. The dog at once turned to sniff the ground, and then began to go forward up the steep mountain slope. Joey followed, clutching his collar firmly. It was hard climb, and it struck her that Cosimo must have had a bad time of it getting the princess up here. Going up was bad enough, but coming down would be infinitely worse. She wondered how ever she would get Elizaveta safely to the road again. She had cut her signs as she promised. She did not like to trust so much chalk. If the rain came, it would soon wash away her marks, but cutting was likely to last as long as it would be wanted. Up and up Joey began to think she never would reach the top of this awful path. She had to pause once or twice to rest her weary back and legs. But always she went on after a few minutes. And then suddenly Rufus stopped. The scent was faint. He circled round and round looking for it, but found nothing, and finally plumped down on his haunches and sat there, looking at his mistress with his tongue hanging out of his mouth. He had done his best, but he couldn't follow the scent that wasn't there. Some children would have given up after that, but not Joey Bettany. They must have got fed up and carried her, she mused. I'll bet it was that Tarniki man that had to do the carrying. I don't suppose they did anything but go straight on. I'll try that anyhow. Come on, Rufus, old thing. You shall have a nice drink as soon as we come to another stream. Rufus got up reluctantly and followed his mistress as she struggled on up the path. It got steeper, and it was all Joey could do to go on. What was more, the sun was setting, and the darkness could come very soon in this place. Overshadowed as it was by mountain peaks all round, Joey put her best foot forward. She had no desire to spend the night on a mountain path, though she had no objection to sleeping on an elm. Suddenly, she came to what looked like a complete stoppage, for a huge boulder was in the way, and she did not see how she could climb over and round it. Now it was Rufus's turn. He suddenly put his nose to the ground, uttered a low bark, and turned to the right of the obstacle. He had got the scent again. Joey followed him, discovered that it was just possible for her to scramble up by a tiny projections in the rock, and guessed that it had been necessary to put the princess down while one of the men went up first, and they pulled her up between them. It would be the only way in which they would ever get her beyond it. She cut her trefoil deep in the side of the soft rock, and then followed and scrambled beside which anything that had gone before were mere child's play. When finally she was safely at the other side, she was too exhausted to do anything but lay flat on the path and pant for breath. Rufus, on the other hand, wanted to go on. With all the insistence of his magnificent breed, he was ready to kill himself in the search. He had got the scent once more, and he was burning to follow it. However, it was his duty to stay by his little mistress, so he lay down and made the most of his brief rest. At length Joey got up and went on. She was nearly at the end of the climb, for she had only gone a few meters further when she found that she was looking up at a grassy edge. That put new life into her, and she made good time for the next 10 minutes. Finally, she found herself in a long, narrow elm, which seemed to extend right round the mountain. The night had fallen by this time, and she was in darkness. I can't go on, she thought. I simply must rest, or I should be all in and of no use to anybody. I wonder where I had better go. Rufus showed her, pulling at her dress to persuade her to get up. He made for the rock wall. She followed him, stumbling with weariness, and presently they found themselves right under it. The dog turned to the left, and she went with him. For 400 meters they went forward. Then a little stream blocked the way. Joey dropped beside it. She was done. Not even the knowledge that Elisabetta was in danger could have gotten her to her feet just then. She lay over a boulder, worn out to the verge of tears. Rufus let her lay. The scent had died again at the water's edge, and he knew no reason to go further. He plunged breast deep into it and drank thirstily. For minutes together, Jo lay where she had fallen. Finally, she pulled herself up, followed the dog's example. The cold water refreshed her, and she remembered that she had another roll in her pocket, as well as the blueberrine tart. She fished them out and divided her food with Rufus, ate every crumb. Then she looked round for some sort of shelter for the night. The air on these elms is very chilly at night, even in the heart of the summer, and the dews are heavy. Joey knew that it would be madness to stay where she was. She had a very healthy dislike of being ill, and in any case, Madge would have had worry enough when she found them without having to nurse one of them through an illness. She looked up the sky with a very weather-wise air. It was a clear night, and the stars were blazing in the sky. The moon had not risen. She was nearly in the last quarter and would not come out till much later. Still the stars gave enough light for Joey, and the sky told her that it was likely to be a fine night. She turned and looked at the dark mass, the rock wall, considering. It was more than likely that there would be some little hollow or cleft in it, where she could lie. She was so sleepy that she didn't much mind where it was so long as she could go to sleep. She decided to cross the little stream and see what was to be had on the other side. It was only narrow, though it was fairly deep, considering. She went back a few steps and took a run, clearing it easily, and then she went cautiously forward, keeping to the wall. She had barely taken 3 steps when she heard a sound that almost caused her heart to stop breathing. It was the call of an owl, uttered 3 times in succession. Joe stopped dead. Elisaveta was here. She had not expected it. Yet, when she came to think of it, it was one of the best places in which she could have been. The huge boulder in the path would stop most people from trying to get any further on, for they would think that it was impossible to go on. Quite likely there were caves in the limestone, and it was obvious that no cattle were herded here. If there had been, she must have heard something of them, for in the troll every cow wears a bell round its neck, and the tinkling sounds of the bell carry far, especially on such a still night as this was. If there were no cows on the elm, then there would be no human beings. Nobody there would be there to report the arrival of the 3 strangers. Finally, it was comparatively near the Tarnsey. Joey felt as if she had walked at least 100 miles that day, but she knew that she could not have done quite a quarter of that distance. Therefore, they were well within the circuit of the Turnalp. Anyone looking for the child would naturally expect her abductors to take her as far away as possible. And if there were not for Joey's guidecraft, she might have been where she was all the summer without anyone suspecting where she had been put. Joey suddenly felt very pleased with herself. She could not let the cry pass without giving Elisaveta the assistance that help was near at hand. She repeated the call once, and then she went on, feeling her way very carefully and pausing between each step to listen. It was as well that she did so. She had just moved forward very cautiously when she heard the sound of voices. She let herself down on the long grass, Rufus dropping behind her with the same noiseless movement. It was a pet trick of hers, which Joey had taught him for the sake of showing Grizel that, big as he was, he could move without a sound. Perhaps the wise dog also scented danger. At any rate, he froze, as Joey had done, and they were practically invisible in the deep shadow of the crag. 2 figures appeared coming out of the wall. So it seemed, and Joey recognized them at once as being Tarnaki and Cosimo. They spoke in Russian, and she listened with all her might. The prince seemed to be in a bad temper. "Bah!" he sneered to his friend. "It was but an owl. You ought to be a woman, Tarniki. You have such sensitive nerves." Tarniki did not answer. Perhaps he was too furious at his master's taunt. The prince went on pleasantly. "I shall make stiff terms, I can tell you, after all the trouble we have had to get that brat up here. My arms still ache with hauling her up that last bit of the path." Tarnaki, who, as Joey had surmised, had the heaviest part to carry, still said nothing. The prince took a look round at the sky and the elm, and they turned to go back to the place whence they had come. Then he turned to the other. "She will sleep tonight," he said. "Also, I think she does not as yet suspect." "No, Highness," said Tarniki. "Good. Then there will be no need to keep guard tonight, so we will both rest. Tomorrow I go down to the pass, and will get into Germany, from where it will be an easy matter to conduct negotiations. I anticipate no difficulty there. Carlo adores the child's footprints, and he will go to any lengths to get her back. Upon my word, I've a good mind to make him abdicate." He burst into an uproarious laugh at his own joke, and then he went off, and Tarniki, after a final look round, followed him. Joey waited until they were inside, and then she gave the owl's call again, and after that she settled down to wait in a corner of the rock, where with Rufus forming a barrier between her and the outer world, she was soon asleep.